Welcome to another episode of On the Line. This is Holly Scott.
And I'm Joe Mullings. Happy to be here today with you, Miss Scott.
Happy to be here as well. Loving our new studio. It's fantastic.
Totally cool. This is labor of a lot of people. We mentioned that in the last episode. And nice gift for the end of the year. And you and I were talking, end of the year has a lot of people thinking about New Year's resolutions. What am I going to do in 19? New job market. What should I be looking at? What are the trends? What are the tech? So what guidance would you give to people in life sciences, MedTech, biotech?
Well, I'm extremely optimistic. I don't know how you feel about 2019, but I'm feeling really...
I'm pumped with you.
Yeah, I'm pumped about it. I think there's a lot of exciting things to watch from technology perspective as well as from our industry and search itself, talent acquisition. But speaking to our audience, they're interested in knowing what trends we're staying close to.
Yeah.
So what do you think in one word is the one to watch? What's the big word going into 2019?
You know, I think... I use the word, so there's one word. If I have to pick one, it's T, transition. I'm seeing a transition occur where data and device and non-MedTech juggernauts are starting to converge.
Yes, for sure. That's the one word that is on our minds every day is data, right? Data and where it's going, where it's at today, the value it brings.
Yeah, and so I'm not rushing into that transition, but the transition is already on the rails.
It's happening.
It's clear when you look at all of the precursor data coming out. When you start here, go look at the patents that have been issued over the last couple of years. And the things that include cloud, machine learning, deep learning, robotics, those 88 or 90% of those are owned by Amazon, Apple, IBM, Samsung, and I'm probably leaving somebody out here. And I think less than 0.5% are owned by medical device companies.
It's happening. It's happening. That blend and that harmony is like you said, it's on the rails and it's only going to continue.
Yeah, and it's a slow roll. And so it doesn't mean that the med device industry is doomed. What it means is there's a transition.
Oh, yeah.
I think that as I look at careers, we always talk about where's the career puck going to be in 3 or 4 years. That's what you should be concerned with. I think what you're going to look at is the med device manufacturers will always own that. They will own the factories. They will make the devices. They will have access to the patients, the docs. What the interesting transition is the gap opportunity that's occurring between the people who know how to work the data, who know how to pull that data off a smart device because the patient is always on, and then do something with that data from a predictive analytics, future forecasting, speed through clinical trials. Those new entrants into the medical device industry are, again, Apple, Amazon, Google. All of those companies are going to now be the new MedTech acquirers of the organizations that are going to start to declare themselves that are never been there before, that fill that gap of how do I get from the device to the data. And so we're going to start to see huge activity in that area.
Yeah, and the last 2 years can certainly be an indicator. Regulatory is also going to be in significant demand in that area.
Regulatory and quality.
Yeah, regulatory, quality, and clinical, and navigating these new waters where data is now integrated and privacy issues and security issues and what exactly does this mean? Just because it's now an imaging device and it's non-invasive, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to be something brand new and require a specific regulatory path.
Yeah, but there's going to be differences in there too, though, Hal. So here's what's going to happen is, and all my VCs are going to see this too, for those listening. The VCs forever in MedTech have looked for an investment in a company that has to go through a 510 or a PMA. And then at the end of the game, for the most part, has to bring a product to market. And depending on what path you take, it could be 2 years, it could be 7 years. But anyway, it's a long investment. The emerging market right now is going to be those companies that are sit in that chasm, and that chasm is a chasm of opportunity, where you're not going to have an end product. What you're going to have is a technology that connects the medical device to the data machine.
To the data machine, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And actionable outcomes from that data.
Right.
VCs now are going to be able to put in a lot less money because there's not as much of a clinical lift. Because in medical devices, the investment is the clinical lift.
Yeah.
So now you're going to get used to a higher cadence of transactions because the Googles, the Amazons, the Facebooks, the Apples are used to buying tech firms to fill the gap in their blind spot in their tech platforms.
True.
That's a typical move for them.
True.
But medical
true.
device companies and investors have always been locked and loaded, justifiably so, on a device.
Right, and getting that final approval. We are seeing, speaking of the clinical, and I think this investment will continue, is that companies are becoming more and more clinical long-term companies because the data is only going to continue to make the organization, the data, the end product, the diagnosis better and better and better. So the clinical lift may actually end up being longer and more significant. However, the data continues to be, or the device, the end result continues to be better and better, right?
Yeah, and the more data you get, the better your algorithm gets. So if we're going to look at ML or deep learning or predictive analytics, the more data, the more value.
Right.
And so clinical outcomes are all about data. And so there's also going to be an emerging tech on you're gathering that data, what are you doing with that data, and how do I leverage that? We've seen it already. Apple's doing it with accelerating clinical trials. 23andMe is doing it in the pharma business with accelerating clinical trials. So that's an emerging tech as well that is going to be, I think, a very broad opportunity 2019, 2020.
Yeah. So for individuals that are close to that, whatever you're involved with right now, if you see opportunities to leverage or get exposure there, highly recommended.
Yeah. Here's another. So interestingly enough, I think voice is a tremendous business. And as you know, we're starting a new division in the Mullings Group, voice and vision.
Yes.
Because we think imaging, navigation, and again, voice, meaning anything that has to do with a tone, right? There are a number of techs coming out right now where they're using voice for predictive analytics, and I'm seeing this for the first time in MedTech emerging, and where they're able, this company in particular can predict heart function post CHF, congestive heart failure diagnosis, and impact that 30-day window. I think that you're going to see more and more voice be integrated in the healthcare community, whether it's at the end range for the doctor or the surgeon becoming more efficient, but also on the early end of diagnostics. So keep your eyes on voice. I just had a very good friend who signed up for a CEO role coming out of Israel. And when I dug into that, I found more than, I think it was 20-something companies in the voice realm in MedTech.
Yeah, interesting. It's one to watch for sure. And that ties into imaging, right? Imaging is definitely a continued trend that we expect to be big in 2019. You can have the best tools in the world, a la surgical robotics over the last several years, and will continue to grow. However, the imaging and the navigation in those particular cases is going to become critical.
Yeah. And the imaging is important because navigation and imaging go together, as you pointed out. But imaging, you've got to get yourself thinking imaging in a number of different areas: near IR, IR, OCT. We have a number of companies right now developing tissue characterization technologies, proximity sensing, and then being able to triangulate tissue characterization using whatever tech they want to use, low-cost sensors, and then data analytics and predictive analytics gives an outcome or guidance to the surgeon or the clinician in order to either treat or diagnose.
Right. Well, and like look at ultrasound, right? Tried and true for how many years, and we were seeing some pretty cool real-time imaging technologies leveraging ultrasound with smart robotics and some really interesting applications there too.
Yeah, and on the robotics, so those who follow us know that we're super dominant in the robotics space. Here's where I think robotics is in 2019, 2020, and next 2 or 3 years. I think surgical robotics totally is going to be a primary market over the next few years.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a couple companies trying to boil the ocean in that space. Aside from the severe regulatory cycles that they've got to go through, there's going to be huge delays there. So I think people are underclubbing that. Anytime you're trying to bring one of the most sophisticated platforms to the market ever seen, you're going to run into major challenges, not just from engineering, but from regulatory. So that's number one. So if you're putting your career on boiling the ocean in surgical robotics and that platform, just know what you're walking into. I think that robotics entry point over the next few years is 2 areas. One is diagnostics. I'm going to shout out to a company in Southern Cal right now called Neural Analytics. They're a proxy for, they're taking an autonomous surgical robot and using it in an ultrasound application. Right now in neuro, but they're also looking into cardio. So anywhere you can take you can take a robot in medical devices, take your brain out of it being surgical, put it in the diagnostic realm, and a repeatable movement with a high amount of data that needs to come out of it, right? That you can get a quick diagnosis on, right? And you can replace a person, a highly trained person, who is going to be, fortunately or unfortunately, easier to replace or bump out of that space with a quicker standard of care delivered at the patient bedside. That is an enormous business. So look for robotics and medical device to be on the diagnostic side more so than boiling the ocean. And then I think
Huge opportunity there.
yeah,
Huge
and I think
opportunity there.
bedside too. You're going to start to see the Stores of the world, the Olympuses of the world, the scope companies of the world engaging with smaller players that are emerging right now, that are offering simpler solutions that can marry up a medical device that augments the surgeon's skills, still collects reasonable, valuable data, and then tie it to an imaging navigation play, which I'm glad to see those scope companies moving into, because they stink at making the device itself. They're great on the visualization side.
Right.
I think 2019 to 2021 are home runs in that space. Again, not taking the place of robotics, but robotics on the grand scale of the entire ecosystem is going to require a lot more time than everybody thought.
Yeah, and I think it's become a huge opportunity for the surgeons because now they're seeing, well, let's see, I don't know if I want to jump to this extreme.
Yeah,
with
$1.5 million totally out of my hands.
Exactly. And even the control, right? Maybe I don't want to be all the way at the other side of the room operating my video game during procedure.
I don't want to sit in an autonomous car.
Right. So there you go. So there's this nice opportunity for these smaller players, perhaps smaller just by size, meaning, but that have significant opportunity to impact the patient and impact the surgical process overall.
Yeah, and you're going to get a better look. There's only 2 or 3 companies who can afford billion-dollar platforms.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so we know who
Yeah,
they are,
yeah.
right? And so those billion-dollar platforms also require billion-dollar infrastructure.
Exactly.
So therefore, you're going to have very few people entering there.
That's right.
And anytime you try and do a U-turn with the Queen Mary, it takes a while,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And so that's what's happening and
That's right.
trying to boil the ocean in surgical robotics. But if you have a series of small speedboats who are all moving in tandem with each other intelligently, and you now start to nibble at the bottom end of that market, where you get higher adoption with a lower threat to the surgeon. You get a higher adoption with a more simple augmentation, amplification of surgeon skills. And you tie that to having the surgeon be able to see better and navigate better for $100,000 instead of $1.5 million. I think that's the way in, quite honestly. And it will meet somewhere down the road in 2025,
That's right.
2026. But again, this podcast is about careers for you guys listening right now. I would make sure that you're not navigating your career based upon one of the big players' plans for the mid 2020s, but you can still enter in at that point in time if you get 2 or 3 gigs under your belt over the next 6 years.
That's right. Yeah.
And a smaller, constantly pursuing new tech.
Exactly. No, you're right. It's a nice opportunity, and it's different than it has been in the last few years because there's going to be more.
We all
more
bought
options.
in on the big boil the ocean.
Sure,
And
it's
it
still
needs
there.
to be there.
There's still lots of opportunity.
But it's got to go through teaching hospitals, right? So if you think about the
exactly.
adoption, you got to get those robots into the teaching hospitals. Then what you got to do is you got to get this current generation of surgeons out of the way. Because the guys in their 50s and 60s are not going to jump on surgical robotic platforms.
They
Some
don't need
will,
to, right?
the majority won't.
Yep,
right?
exactly.
And there's a lot of pull through in the business when you have a surgical robot. Friends of ours up here who run the hospital who have a big surgical platform tell me it's not necessarily the robot itself, it's the pull through additional procedures we get. I get that, but that can't be your business model. You can't. That cannot be your business model. So in the meantime, if you're developing your career, I will tell you that you get just as much credit in being a little small company that's making a little surgical robotic, let's not even call it robot, a surgeon's empowering amplification of his or her skills, plus the imaging navigation. If you continue just to stay in that domain, if you want to go for the big sort of ocean boil down range, you can do it. Also, when you're boiling the ocean, the first 25% of that lift is fun. The second or the next 75% is paperwork.
Absolutely.
And so depending on what you want to do, if you dig paperwork,
That's right.
then go ahead and join the Boil the Ocean effort. If you don't enjoy paperwork, I wouldn't.
Yeah. Well, there's in our friends in the Midwest, the surgical augmentation company, that they've got a nice option there. So there's definitely options if you want to get in.
So you got data. We talked about data. Is there any markets in particular you like?
Well, I always like cardiology, right? Near and dear, and it has been forever. So we'll continue to see structural heart grow and that quest for, I call it kind of the quest for the perfectly balanced heart. So it's optimally functioning at all times and managing that. So we're watching the continued debate of replacement versus repair on valves and those structural challenges and interesting how active outside the U.S. activity is and has continued to be over the last few years. We expect that to happen. The individuals who have been in cardiology for years, there's still lots of opportunity there.
God. Yeah, and I think the conversation that's taking place is no longer an argument of repair or replace. It's now
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. More patient-centric at the time.
Yeah, and I think that there's not going to be a silver bullet right now on a single winner. That structural heart platform is unique in that matter, where if you think about it, most platforms have been dominated by one or two solutions, right? I think because of patient population, because of patient anatomy, because of the specialization required in learning a structural heart procedure, I think you're going to see platform technologies occur. You're seeing it already with Abbott. It'll be interesting to see what happened with Edwards if they go after multiple platforms, or as they end up, I think, being acquired by Abbott. I think Medtronic, I think Edwards gets picked up by Abbott. And I agree with you, structural heart's super interesting, which then leads to CHF, heart failure, because all you're doing with that is graduating a whole bunch of patients downrange who are going to end up in heart failure.
Right.
So that heart failure space is enormous on the diagnostic and therapeutic side.
Completely. And I think that ties in nicely to another one that I watch for interest, fun, as well as a major trend, but regenerative medicine, I think, is fascinating. And there's a lot going into that now, and more so than ever before. And in the device side, it had always been sluggish because we're so much more mechanical, electrical centric, right? And that's more science oriented. But with 3D printing and what's happening now and stem cells, things are it's happening. There are products in clinical trials right now
Well, yeah.
that are phenomenal and have
that's
so much
biotech
opportunity.
too. So that's where the combo products come in, right?
Yes.
So I think biotech, we have a very large client in Cambridge in the life sciences who's in biotech who's doing that, who's taking real simple stem cells, putting the therapeutic load in the cell, turning it into a red blood cell, and then cloaking that and then injecting that into the body and allowing it to deliver its payload, right? And again, so there's an interesting mix there of biotech and device. And we've also just picked up one on the West Coast in the Bay Area who's doing something similar. So that is meant to be regenerative in nature and some sort of genesis, whether it's cardiogenesis, right? I like that a lot. And then that leads us into the cyborg human. We're doing a lot of neurostim, a lot of active implantables.
Yes.
Some things we're under NDA that we can't talk about that are... the one I'm thinking about is almost being able to communicate with another person without speaking. That one that somebody in our firm is running right now, right? And the clinical trials on that, I know it was a start on the military side, but where you can actually communicate without speaking to a person. So the whole cyborg thing is coming. And again, we're not talking about Arnold cyborg, but we're talking about augmented living through implantables. First, it will be therapeutic, but then it will be upgrading healthy people.
Yeah, it's
That's what I'm waiting
phenomenal.
for. I
Yeah.
hope I'm still in the business.
No, it's exciting to watch. It's exciting to watch.
I'll be on the clinical trial for, well, I can't say that here.
Well, you and we can speak without speaking. That's not cyborg related.
That's not
though. It's
cyborg.
different.
That's 20-something years of living in the same space. And, so that clinical trial would be interesting. So.
Yeah, so certainly that's an area to watch. I think the trend of the consumer driving innovation and controlling their destiny is going to continue. We've seen the wearables over the last few years. That's just going to continue. Everything with a sensor in it is exciting. It's just happening. It's
and I think it's good for careers.
information.
I don't know the end game. I'm not convinced, at least over the next couple of years, that human beings are going to change their behavior because of the wearable. They already know if they smoke, they're going to die. They smoke. They already know if they drink too much, they're going to die. They keep drinking.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
and so
I
I
agree.
dig the tech on the wearables. I would just have caution to manage expectations on, other than collecting data for clinical use downrange and some other tech. I'm a little less aggressive on that. I think it's great. But I just don't know what the end game is on that.
Right. Well, from my perspective, as either a product development engineer or someone on the upstream side of it, you're getting such good experience with integrating any kind of microelectronic into any kind of
Right. Some sort of
traditional-
feedback, sensor. So
Yeah.
sensor development's big to that point. Again, making sure I put my comments in context. If I was buying stock right now, I would not be buying stock in any medsumer devices.
Right.
Okay.
Because you're
But from a career development perspective, and if you really want sensor experience and big data experience and new clinical approaches and all that kind of stuff, absolutely. But if I was managing my stock portfolio, I wouldn't be investing in any of those companies.
Yeah. So
Just my
it's
gut.
feeling a little faddish to you.
Just feeling, I don't know what the end game is.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's gadgets. I think
Yeah.
it's cool. It's gadgets. I think it's going to come and go. But what it does lead to is fantastic sensor development. And so sensor development really is what the play is there.
Right,
Because then
right.
when we can take those sensors and do something meaningful that will, because human beings are funny until they're, and even then, until they're given the death sentence, they don't modify behavior.
Right. No.
Right?
That's true.
Right. So, until
Yeah.
one of those things say, Ms. Scott, 18 cells were detected in your left breast that were cancerous, you're not going to respond to that.
Right.
Right. But if it says the shit you just ate may cause cancer,
Right.
you're not going to do anything.
Right. Exactly.
Right?
No,
That ding dong donut you just ate.
it's true.
So I would just, again, caution, know what you're getting into your play for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think we watch the ophthalmic market for sure. There's always the interest in vision. I don't think people realize how much of a disability it is until you lose it, right?
Again,
It's
to
one of the
that point.
biggest markets out there, and with the aging population, it's one to watch.
Yeah,
So,
and eye is, eye care, diagnostics, and then surgical. So I would be really careful. And again, I have some great friends who are optometrists. If I was in the optometrist space and not on the surgical side or the eye care side, I'd be really careful. That's becoming a commoditized business. It's only going to be a
certainly is.
matter of 3 years before I go,
yeah, well,
okay,
this
and my eyeglasses are going to be delivered to my house with
There
my
you go.
Pensal frame. Super. So be
Yeah.
careful as you pick techs that you don't pick a tech that's going to be commoditized.
Right,
Right.
right.
So right now, I really worry about just general eye care, general eye diagnostics. Anything that can be quote unquote Amazoned, I'd be super careful with. Anything that's a commodity. I think wound care has some major issues with it. I think wound care on the ulcer side, be really careful. All that stuff is going to be able to be ordered via an electronic script and directly to Amazon, much like diabetic supplies are ordered to your house.
Right,
So I'd
exactly.
be super careful on that.
Yeah.
And then we have a lot of friends in this. I'm going to piss them off, but I'm always just shooting my hunches. I worry about the orthopedic business a lot. I think that business, if it didn't have the surgical robot spin on it right now, it probably would be in more danger. It's a very fragmented market. It's based today exclusively on materials, and it's a race to the bottom for price. Trauma hasn't kicked up, spine hasn't kicked up. Again, huge fan of the space. I just don't know where it goes from here in regards to innovation.
Yeah, well, they've solved so many of the most complex problems, such as spine and so forth. There's not a ton of opportunity
No,
there.
and the biologic space has always struggled a little bit.
Yeah.
So if you're entering the market right now, I wouldn't go into orthopedics.
Right. I would agree
And I'd
with
be
that.
careful on certain components in ophthalmology. And then just look at every product that you're making. Can it be Amazoned in regards to diagnostic and then ordered? And then finally, there's a device, and then there's the data. Start looking for companies that are bridging that gap right now, and don't worry about it if they don't have an end product that's sold directly to. Again, I think there's an enormous opportunity, bigger than anybody is even thinking about right now, on that chasm between the device and delivering the data and the tech that delivers the data to the Amazons, the Googles, the IBMs.
Agree.
That's where I think the huge opportunity is over the next few years.
Agree. No, the companies that are exciting right now are the high-tech companies operating in a medtech world. Right?
Yeah, and just again closing, think of the billions of dollars that they have for acquisitions.
Yes.
Think of the patients that, meaning PATIENCE, the patients that they have on these acquisitions.
Exactly.
When you look at the MedTech strategics, they are tighter than hell on their money and literally are looking quarter to quarter and almost playing defense in their acquisitions right now rather than forward-looking offense. And I think the non-MedTech, high-tech players, the juggernauts, are an enormous opportunity for everybody because of the money they have and the insight they have on emerging markets.
Agree.
So.
No, it's going to be a great year. It's going to be exciting to watch.
Yep.
We'll see how it all rolls out as we
Yep.
roll into the balance of 2018.
Cool. So
Yeah.
I pissed off a lot of my clients today, and I made a lot of them happy.
No,
but
I don't
just
think so. They know
bringing
you,
the
Joe.
truth.
As always.
Hey, I don't know when this one will already have come out. I hope you saw me at Harvard last week. I'm at Harvard this weekend
Yeah.
for the HBS Healthcare Alumni Association, the 18th.
That'll
So
be
that's
great.
super excited. Peter Stebbins from J&J is putting on a great panel there about the shakeup in the CEO suite
Yeah.
or the C-suite. So I'm excited about that. And then we're off to LinkedIn.
Right.
And then I'm off to see my man Gary V. Gosh, I've got so many things going on.
MedTech
so.
strategist at the end of the month.
MedTech strategist, thanks, at the end of
In,
November
California.
in San Fran. If you don't go to that show or you're not familiar with that show,
It's a good one.
I think it's one of the most impressive medical device opportunities in our 28 years, I think it's the biggest ROI.
Yeah, especially
so,
in the
MedTech
startup world.
strategist, San Fran, and then Dublin. We're a platinum sponsor. That's how much we believe in it. We're up there, I think, with J&J's with us and a couple others on the headlines. So check that out as well. We'll be in San Fran. Reach out to us if you want to get together. We got a big hospitality room. We're running a couple podcasts. We're going to be highlighting and pimping some new techs. So a little commercial for that.
Sounds great.
Cool. So this has been another episode of On the Line. I'm Joe Mullings.
And I'm Holly Scott.
Y'all be good. Take care.